Okay, well, thank you guys so much for joining. I'll let Juan introduce himself in just a minute, but so I'm super excited that after a few months or several months, I don't remember when I started this group. A day seems like a year these days. So, but I'm excited that we're finally doing our first little environmental sustainability group meeting or event. So with that, I'd like to introduce our special guest today, Juan Caicedo. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Good. No, it's not fine. You can correct me. So Juan is the ecologist and science coordinator from Grupo Eco Comunitario. Juan grew up in California, but with Colombian parents, and has been living here in Bogota for 9 years near El Virrey Park. He's an ecologist with degrees in water resources management and ecology, as well as 20 years of experience in the conservation of flora and fauna. And he's worked for and collaborated with various organizations such as the Nature Conservancy, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Pro Natura Mexico, and Pro Aves Colombia in the U.S., Mexico, Costa Rica, Belize, and Colombia. And so now he coordinates Grupo Eco Comunitario and a wide variety of community-based research and conservation initiatives related to urban biodiversity of the barrios of the Gran Chico. And yeah, I totally didn't read that straight from my paper. But we're gonna have about 45 minutes from Juan and about 15 minutes for Q&A. And Juan, do you care if do you want people to break in with questions or hold their questions?
Either way, it's fine. If somebody has something, yeah, go ahead and jump in as we go. That's fine.
Okay.
And Jessica, thanks so much, and the AWC for organizing this. We're always excited to meet more people that are interested in sustainability issues, and having the opportunity to share with them what we've been doing and in this kind of cross-pollination of a lot of you are involved in similar things that are really interesting. And yeah, so being able to share with you guys and then learn from any experiences that you have that we can adapt here to these urban green spaces here in Bogota. So let me share the screen and then we'll go ahead and get started. Everybody seeing that?
Yep, good to go.
Okay, let me go full screen. Okay, great. So as Jessica was saying, my parents are from Colombia. They moved to the United States over 40 years ago. My brother and myself were both born there in the US. We ended up in California. I grew up in the East Bay, near San Francisco, near Berkeley, that area. And then I went through high school there, started studying watershed management and forestry and wildlife in Northern California, north of Lake Tahoe in the Sierra Nevadas of California. Then continued studying in Arizona, where I got really involved in border issues and similar type of work, but in much more rural settings in Mexico, the Gulf of California, and that started taking me throughout Central Latin America, working with these different kind of international non-governmental organizations like Nature Conservancy and the international program, the U.S. Forest Service, etc. And then about 9 years ago, came to Colombia, came back. I've come several times. I still have a lot of family here, and ended up staying. And so now it's 9 years on. And about 6 years ago, we moved here to the, right here in front of the Parque El Virrey. And when I got here, this park is really well known here in Bogota for a lot of different reasons. It's a lot of people come to do exercise here. They have some big food festival here in August. And it's kind of in this wealthier part of town. So the parks are a little more organized with lights and garbage, and there's more upkeep. But when I started asking around about what was known about the biodiversity here in the park, if there was at least maybe a bird species list, a flora, a species list of trees, We found out really quick that although the Virey is really well known, the biodiversity of the Virey has never been a consideration. So 6 years ago, we started looking at birds. Was the first group that really kind of started to open the door, birds and trees. But very quickly, it started to snowball into butterflies, native bees, bats, all these other things that we were seeing while we were starting to go out and bird watching. And now it's become a really well-known and very solid urban ecology program with a very strong outreach and a very strong component of not only generating this biodiversity information, but really making a big effort that information becomes an actor and becomes part of the discussion when, as you'll see, so many different moments where it's either deciding what species of trees we should be planting, how we're going to deal with rats, mosquitoes, things like that here in the urban areas of Bogota. And now it's the Parque El Virey, in the area that we're going to be focusing on today, is now one of the most studied areas ecologically here in Bogota, and is this kind of hotbed of innovation. We have a lot of students, universities with projects here of not only the biodiversity, but also different investigative research lines of eco-urbanism, climate change, resiliency here in the city, etc. So what I want to show you guys real first is a very short video. It's about 2 minutes. It's a quick introduction here to the Gran Chico. The text is in Spanish, but it's got some really beautiful shots. And then we'll get into what this video as an introduction of what's going on here in this area. Okay, so that video is a very quick overview of this area in red. It's kind of number 2. So this is the area that we call the Gran Chico. if any of you have been to the Museo Chico in the north here of Chapinero, it's one of the most beautiful haciendas that still exist here in Bogota, and it has this beautiful park. When that hacienda that this year celebrates 400 years of written history this year. This hacienda used to be, a lot of this area that we see that urbanized used to be part of that hacienda. We'll get into a little more closer here in a minute, but here in Bogota, one of the biggest conservation issues and concepts revolves around what they call the main ecological structure, or la estructura ecológica principal. So essentially, looking at ways that the Cerros Orientales, the mountains here on the eastern edge of Bogota, can connect through a series of these green spaces to the real Bogota, to the west. And so what we're going to be focusing on is a case study here in that area red, between Calle 85 and Calle 94, but is totally applicable to all these other areas downstream or other corridors here in the city. So on the left, so this is the same general area in white, 1940 and 1998. So 1940, you can see the Quebrada Chico, the El Chico Creek, that is one of our focus areas, used to extend down through the valley. It was wide open, open grassland. Surely there would have been these kind of flower meadows in there as well. The seasonal wetlands, that creek every now and then would flood on a big wet year. And so we'd have this kind of open habitat that had a lot of biodiversity in it that was specific to that type. So a lot of butterflies, bees, a lot of insect pollinators would have been in there. But look to the right, so 50 years, not even 50 years, not even in one generation of somebody's life, this whole area is completely urbanized. So the urbanization of Bogota has been really rapid and really dramatic. But down in this area, it was one of the first real sectors of the city that was planned as in its first kind of stage as sort of an American style suburb. So now they're all buildings, but they used to be houses, 1 or 2 stories with a big backyard, a big front yard, tree-lined streets. So it was a lot of parks. It was a very green neighborhood. And let's zoom in a little bit more. So today, this is that same general area, looking from the west, looking towards the mountains. And so we have two kind of main splits. The yellow line that goes up into the mountains is the rural section. So that's the urban limit of Bogota. And then the rural section of Bogota goes all the way up to the ridge of the mountains. But for us in our area, we have 2 sub-watersheds. The main one is the Quebrada, La Cuenca del Chico, the Chico watershed, which is this one here. And here it drains what is now a protected stream. Over the past 3 years, we've been really involved in getting a protection for this creek. So now it's a riparian corridor area, as they're known here in Bogota. Here at the end, there's a small little wetland. It's basically on Calle 94 in Carrera Novena. There's a park there, and this creek ends up in this beautiful little wetland here, right in urban Chapinero. And then this long line here, this is the El Virrey, the canal that goes down, the Parque El Virrey, that is also a protected area now. So it's a riparian corridor that's also a park. But then we have, say, Calle 92, this long one that comes right down the middle, Calle 94, that start basically at the foot of the Cerros Orientales, and these major tree-lined avenues. They come all the way down to the highway, the Autopista Norte here. So something else that's really interesting is since the city's laid out in a grid, so from the mountains it goes down, they come up in number, Carrera Séptima, 11, 15. A lot of the research that we do is looking at what species of fauna, birds and butterflies and bees in particular, that are from known more from the Cerros Orientales, but they come down into the city, and we can start to map exactly how deep into the city these species are coming by the carreras. And so let's go a little more. So at the very top, we have what they call a sub-paramo. So this is very much higher altitude habitats, 3,244 meters. So it's about 650 meters or so from the ridge line down to, say, Carrera Septima. So we have very much a natural area up here, very forested, and then it connects. And we have this transition from this upland natural habitats into this gradient down into the city. Another way of looking at this whole area is that we've mapped out all the public spaces here. So these are the different public parks, the tree-lined streets that have separators, that have a separation here on the street with trees in them. Lots of different types of parks from different scales here that the city uses. So of these parks, we have over 30 hectares spread out throughout this, of the public green spaces spread out here through this area. This is Parque 93, which many of you might have gone to, some restaurant at some time. This long one here is the Parque El Virrey. I'm sorry, right here, number 1. Number 10 here is Parque Japón. And so these other green areas that aren't in a color are private green areas. So this is the Museo Chico right here, the Seminario Mayor. If you come along Carrera Septima to the north, you'll see this big, beautiful historic building. And something else that's really important here is most of the city, the transition from the Cerros Orientales to the city, there's usually, as down here, a big barrier of buildings, of housing. But from right here, from the Quebrada Chico, from the Museo Chico, all the way to Calle 100, so several blocks up, it's really the last place where the mountains come down and actually touch Carrera Septima without a big fragmentation of urbanization. So this right here is a key area why we're seeing so much biodiversity coming up and down from the mountains into the city, is because we still have significant green area, very strategically organized. So we have the Cerros Orientales come down, we have this big area here of the Seminario Mayor, all these green areas here, these creeks. You cross Carrera Septima and you come right into the Museo Chico, the Parque El Virrey, and all these different green areas in there. So within the Gran Chico of the urban area, so from basically what we're seeing here in the map, without counting all the trees that are way up higher in the mountains, there's about 15,000 trees right here in the urban area of the Gran Chico. If you walk around this neighborhood, a lot of it is like this. So the first picture here on the upper left is the Parque El Virrey, very mature forest. So we have different ages of trees. So the bigger trees were planted longer ago. And then over the decades, people have come in and planted different trees. And so we have different heights of trees, which turns out to be really important. Tall trees, mid trees, shrubs, gardens. On the right, upper right, we see, this is the Parque El Virrey in the background. And then we have this transition towards the built up sections, the buildings. So a lot of the buildings here have very big gardens here right on this at street level. There's these green strips here between the street and the sidewalk. A lot of the terraces and balconies, people have a lot of plants and flowers on their terraces and balconies. So from these public areas, which is say the park and these green strips, really start to work together with these private areas, or at least the potential is there, to really start looking at these green spaces, not only for their ornamental value or the recreational value, but also for the biodiversity and wider sustainability values. This lower picture on the left, I mean, it's a massive urban forest, really is what we're living in here. That is Calle 92. That's the separator of Calle 92. So it's this very wide separation there of the two lanes of traffic with bike routes down the middle, big wide sidewalks, public lighting, and all the rest, but it has this massive forest on there. A lot of the side streets, the same, buildings with very big gardens, these strips here between the street and the sidewalk, some of them are really wide, up to 4 meters wide with trees, and a lot of plants and flowers on the terraces. And so really it's one of the greenest neighborhoods and greenest sectors of all of Bogota. So when we start looking at these areas and we want to start understanding what's there and really what the potential of these areas are, one of the first steps that we really need to do is figure out really what's there. So what's the flora, what are the birds, what are the butterflies, what are all these different groups of animals that are there, and how are they using these green spaces? So this is from the iNaturalist program, which is this great application where you can take a picture, you can upload it to the program, and it puts you, so these green flags here, these green markers are plants, the blue ones are birds, the red ones are insects, the pink ones are fungi. And so you can start, so the photograph that someone might take as just a hobby, if we put it up into these programs, now it really becomes an ecological register of what that plant is, when it was taken, who took it, and this program lets people, so you don't have to know what's the name of the species, you can upload it here, and there's a network of experts that can help you identify it. But so over time, what you can start to do is really make a very wide range baseline of what things are common, what things are native, what things are exotic to the area. And it really helps to start to prioritize what are the most important trees and fauna species that we want to protect, and opportunities for habitat enrichment, which we'll get into here further along. So based on all these this initial environmental assessments, this is what we're looking at in that area. So Calle 85 to 94, the Autopista Norte, to basically the Carrera Séptima. So we're at about 1,000 species now, just in this very small sector. About half of that is flora. So trees, shrubs, plants of all kinds. We're now at 111 species of birds, butterflies and moths. So all these are the main groups that we're studying, most of them. The overall number of species for each group. And what we're finding is that about half of all of the fauna, of all the animals that are in this area, visit flowers. So they're visiting flowers for nectar, for pollen, or feeding on insects that are inside of these flowers, feeding on nectar and pollen. So right off the bat, how the flowering species from trees, small trees, shrubs, gardens, etc., is key, because about half of the fauna right off the bat depend on nectar, on flower resources, nectar and pollen. And so here's a couple of different groups. These are all species that have been photographed here in the area. Some of the butterflies. This little bee up here on the upper right has been photographed. We photographed it in the Parque, in the Museo Chico, and in the Parque El Virrey. We put it on iNaturalist, and we work with several universities and entomologists, and everybody was confused as to what that was, as to what species it was. It ends up now, just a couple of weeks ago, we finally got a confirmation of ID through the University of Kansas in the United States, that this little bee that's called a yellow-faced bee is a new species for Colombia. This other one here, Alebrini, this other little insect here, is also going to be a new species for science. We're working with the Smithsonian Institute, the Natural History Museum, the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., for the identification of that one. When we talk about flies, up here on the left, so we have over 50 species of flies. It's the most diverse group here in Bogota, the Diptera, this group of flies. They all visit flowers. And when I talk to neighbors here about flies, they usually think about the flies that they see, say on the dog poo in the park, and they're not that interested they get very excited about flies. But there's only a couple of species that really do that. The vast majority of the fly species are like this one, with the striped eye. It's a tiger eye. And so there's these beautiful flies that also depend on flowers. And what's really neat too about this group of flies, the flower flies, is that when they're larvae, some of them are predatory and they eat a lot of aphids, which are one of the pests that we have trouble with sometimes in the garden, in people's gardens. So, and then when they're adults, they pollinize the flowers. And so this, throughout its life cycle, it's helping us in two different ways, helping us control pests that we want to control in our gardens. And then when they're adults, they help us pollinize. They help us in the pollination. So we have a bunch of different species of birds that use the flowers or the fruits, 5 species of bats that we'll show you in a little bit more. And so we're starting to find out that we have this wide variety of fauna that are using these green areas. And so whether the plant or the tree, right now our first kind of step is not so much to figure it's just to see what flowers are the most important for this wide variety of fauna, whether that plant is foreign or native here to Colombia. So we can have a plant, and we have lots of them, that are not from Colombia, but are native bee or butterfly or pollinator of some kind is using it in a really important way. So it's much more of an issue whether the plant is native or not. But we look at it as this first step is really how functional is it ecologically in the landscape. So birds, this is our old checklist from 3 years ago. We're in the processes of re-editing it now to upgrade it to have the 111 species that we now have. But for every species, it's a very beautiful checklist that the same person who did the video for us designed this. So for every group, we have the number of species. We have the scientific name, the Spanish common name, and the English name. Whether it's migratory or resident, if it's abundant or rare here in the area. So with this checklist, you can visit the area and have very quickly have a good idea what species are here, what time of year they're here, and it helps you really get to know the birds of your neighborhood a lot faster. Butterflies, we're at 37 species right now. Along with birds and some of these other groups, as I said in the beginning, the area of the Gran Chico is one of the most studied areas here of Bogotá, of urban Bogotá. We're in the top areas for species of birds. We're #1 for right now in the number of butterflies that we have. So this is a guide that's also available free to download off our website. So what we have here for every species of butterfly, 4 pictures. We try to get a picture with its wings closed, its wings open. And then these 2 pictures, the last 2 columns are from collections in the National University, Universidad Nacional. So here in the Gran Chico, we do mostly photography. And then we compare this photography with experts in the collections, the entomology collections that they already have. So we don't do much collecting here. Everything's really based on photography. And something also that's really important with this guide to the butterflies is that for every species of butterfly, we have a picture of its host plant. So these host plants are key. Because these butterflies can visit a wide variety of flowers for nectar, but they're very, very specialized on the plants that they can put their eggs on and that on which their caterpillars will eat. And so if we want to conserve urban butterflies here at Bogotá, it's not only giving them a variety of nectar sources, but also very specifically incorporating in the area their host plants. So right off the bat, we're starting to develop a list of priority plants that we need to conserve or augment in the urban landscapes for these different groups of fauna. The bees of the Gran Chico, so we're at 12 species right now, 11 natives, and then the one on the lower right is our exotic European honeybee. This whole group too is very specialized. One of the things that's really interesting about the Gran Chico is that there's a lot of gardens, there's a lot of different types of plants and a lot of different flowers. So it gives us a really good opportunity to evaluate, of all these plants, of all these flowers, which are the ones that these species are really using in an important way. And something that's been really interesting is that these native bees, as opposed to the European honeybee, only visit very small numbers of species of plants. And so we can sit in a garden that might have 10 different flowers at the moment, and we see one of these bumblebees on the upper left come in, and he's got 10, 15 flowers to choose from. But over time, we'll see that he's only really choosing these 2 or 3 plants. And so we start to build these species lists of plants that are offering something that these insects are really keying in on, and then combining those lists to come up with general overall priority plant lists for the area. And we're looking at it through a lens from bees, from butterflies, from birds, from bats. So right now we're at 9 species of bats that are living wild here in the area, plus domestic cats and dogs. So our most diverse group right now are bats. We have 5 species of those. We've been having a project for the last couple of years with the National University of Bogotá, National University here, the campus here in Bogotá, to study the urban bats. Squirrels are generally above the Carrera Septima. Historically, they used to come across the Carrera Septima to the Museo Chico. We haven't seen one for several years, but you go on the rural section of the watershed, and the squirrels are up there. We have Andean white-eared opossums and long-tailed weasels that cross Carrera Septima, and we have reports of them through this iNaturalist project all the way down to Carrera 11. So several blocks down in between the Parque El Virrey and the Parque El Chico, both of these species are showing up. So this lost group here at the bottom is the common, or it's a brown rat. It's usually what you see in the neighborhood when you see rats. And one of the biggest concerns is when people put out bait or raticides to try to control these rats, what effect it might have on these other mammals, particularly these possums and weasels. Cats, domestic cats, if have you been following anything about bird watching and bird conservation in urban areas? Cats are always one of the biggest concerns, not only for birds, but for lizards and all other kind of wildlife. Even if a cat is well fed at home, it still has that instinct to try to kill stuff and bat them around and play with them. So one of the biggest concerns that we have in these areas are domestic cats that people let out into the area. So in the Museo Chico, there's usually around 5 or so cats that spend most of the day in the park, go home to eat or sleep, but we're concerned about what impacts it might have on wildlife. And then dogs. The 2 dogs on the right, the black and white one and the brown one, those are my 2 dogs, Fito and Luna. And one of their best friends, the black one there, is called Bannon. And I'm telling you this and showing you these dogs because just yesterday, the first dog, the black one, got poisoned somehow and died within 12 hours. And so this was a dog that was very close to mine. We all live in the same neighborhood, and it just as easily could have been one of my dogs that got poisoned. So we're not sure yet what he ate, where he ate it, but it's a terrible way to lose a pet. So as people put out pesticides in their gardens, raticides for rats, we're also concerned about how that might affect our pets. And if you've been to the Parque El Virrey on a sunny day, or pretty much any day of the week, you'll know that a lot of the people that live in this neighborhood have pets and are definitely pet lovers. So anything that can have such a traumatic effect on the neighborhood is a big concern. And so using Bannon's death that was yesterday, there's going to be a new campaign that's going to be starting up about taking a much more critical look at the use of pesticides here in these in the parks, but then also in the private areas next to these parks. Dragonflies.
Juan,
Yep.
sorry to break in. I'm just wanting to do a little time check. We're about 15, 20 minutes till. So
Okay.
maybe we could open up for questions in a few.
Sure.
Great.
We have lots of dragonflies, a new dragonfly guide that's coming out, also based on photography. I'm one of the authors of that guide as well. This is one of the things that might interest many of you. Based on all of our research here in the area, we've come up with an initial list of 53 plants that are priority plants for gardens here in the urban areas. A lot of these plants will work on your terraces and planters and your gardens outside in the buildings. We can talk more about this at the end. All of this is all available on our website. This is a look, looking down from Carrera Séptima, down through the Parque del Virrey. Very narrow every day. The buildings are higher, so it's kind of getting a canyon effect. We have a very complex management situation here. This is just for the Parque del Virrey. We have all of these public entities, residents associations, all the buildings, the private buildings or gardens, various working groups that we're involved in. So it's a very interesting area, one for its biodiversity, but then also trying to articulate all these different actors in a coherent management. We do a lot of walks, we're in the press. We published an article not too long ago specifically about pollinators in urban planning. We give a lot of talks, and so hopefully once the COVID situation gets better down in the future, we can host some walks for the AWC through this neighborhood as well. How do they do it in other areas? How do they restore streams? How do they monitor birds? How do they plan the urban forest, incorporating biodiversity? A lot of examples. And so if we take all those examples and really start to look at how we can adapt them to Bogota, there's just a couple of key concepts here. One is the selection of species of plants, of trees and shrubs. So some fauna, some animals, bats and birds like to forage high in the forest, some low. A lot of them use the gardens in the ground cover. And then throughout the year, we want to select plants that every month of the year, there's flowers or fruits and seeds being produced at these different levels. So from tall trees, medium trees, low trees. This is what really the vast majority of the time that this fauna is in this area, or as they're looking for food resources. These two blue windows are when the migration of birds come through Bogota. So we want to have a special consideration to have a lot of flowering and fruiting trees during these two windows of the year, between March and May and September and November. On the left is what we don't really want, but what we see a lot in Bogota. So big, huge, long streets with one species. This is the Avenida El Dorado. This is all the way down to the airport. On the right is much more what we'd like to see, a variety of trees, different heights, with different fruiting and flowering calendars throughout the year. And this lower picture on the right is just a conceptual drawing of how we can incorporate different species of trees and gardens all together in residential streets or in big avenues. Integrated pest management, I mentioned it before, it's one of the biggest concerns for the wildlife and for our pets and for us as well. And if you have kids that are crying around in parks like the Parque del Virrey, it's also another concern. How people prune the trees, the shrubs, is something that we can all do. We'll be coming up with some guidelines with the botanical gardens in the city to do that better, to incorporate the biodiversity in these areas. We can also add other elements like artificial nests for bees, artificial nest boxes, the host plants for the caterpillars that I mentioned before, the gardens of your buildings, of your terraces, bat boxes for bats. How to manage the water in the area. And so as I said at the beginning, Bogota is very susceptible to climate change. So we're going to have to start designing much more efficiently for very wet years, we have torrential rains, downpours, and then very dry years, and these big swings back and forth. And so how do we use the rainwater in these areas to maintain this vegetation, to clean it before it gets into the creeks and the waters in the wetlands downstream of Bogota is going to be key. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities to incorporate these concepts as we move forward. A couple of things that we've been able to do. So on the upper left, that's the new part of the new protected area for the Museo, for the Quebrada Chico, the Chico Creek with the El Chico wetland there at the top. On the right, those 4 pictures is when we restored that wetland. For 2 years, it was completely dry, overgrown with grass. And so we're able with the city to finally get a crew in there, reflood that area. That's so important for amphibians and dragonflies and the like. On the lower left, that's one of the big gardens here in the Virrey with the crew from the botanical garden once we first did it. That was in October, so we can see now how these gardens have evolved. And as somebody said they're really beautiful right now. They're very flower. If you go on a sunny day, you'll see a lot of butterflies and bees visiting those flowers. New tree planting opportunities. This was the last one. It was exactly the day that the quarantine started, and so everything's been postponed. With the botanical garden, with the residents associations here of the area, of really building those partnerships to incorporate these concepts and then really starting to get these actions done on the ground. This is what a lot of areas of Bogota look like. A lot of flooding, a lot of impermeabilization. How can we go from this to something more like this? Let me go back again. How do we do this so we have very contaminated creeks, flooding in different sections, to something more like this? And I think there's a lot of opportunities to use what we're learning here in the Gran Chico to impact in a more positive way, in a more multifunctional vision of all these green spaces and green infrastructure here in the city. So this is the last slide, key recommendations. Citizen science, education, and partnership building. That's where we all really need to be starting if your neighborhood doesn't already have a program started. So the citizen science through iNaturalist is the best option to really get this photographic baseline of what's there. When we start talking about habitat enrichment, think about those structures from the tallest tree all the way down to the grass and the shrubs and the gardens in between. Diversify the flower type, color, fruits, and seeds, those resources throughout the year in the phenology, that calendar that I showed you. Integrated pest and pruning management, adding those extra elements of nesting, host plant, roosting habitats, and then the sustainable drainage systems. They're going to be key in the sustainability of Bogota in the future. Here's a couple of the groups that have all supported us. We have a lot of projects ongoing with several of these different universities and nonprofit organizations. And muchísimas gracias to all of you guys. Again, Jessica, the AWC, really thanks for opening up this space to us. And whatever questions we have.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Juan. This has been super informative. Great to see all those resources and ideas. Anyone want to start with a question? To go off mute and ask a question. You can also chat it to me if you prefer, or I can start with questions.
I have a question. A while back in the park, or a while back, the botanical garden was taking down trees in the park. Yes? Apparently some were diseased. Is that the case, or can you talk about, or sorry?
Yeah, the last big kind of intervention here in the park with the trees was in 2018. And if you were around at that time, you would have noticed also that it became a huge conflict here in the area, where people were tying themselves to the trees and didn't want the city to cut down the trees. And it became a very high profile, because the Virrey itself is already a high profile area. And so any major event like that really gets a lot of news attention. So what happened there, and we were really involved there in the whole discussion, the last mayor, the last administration that we had, wanted to do a new landscape design for the Parque del Virrey. and especially this lower section between Carrera 15 and the Autopista, the widest, biggest section of the park. So one day, and they were trying to do it very quick. They wanted to take out 155 trees in one go. And they said that all these trees were sick and dying. And we spend a lot of time in this area, and we said, well, there could be a couple, but 155 that are dying and they present a really high risk for the city or for the people that come to the park. And so we got really involved with the neighbors, different resident associations, and it became a really hot conflict here in Bogotá. It's one of the biggest ones surrounding urban forest management and all the wildlife associated. So what ended up happening was there was, I'm not quite sure how you say it in English, but these different control agencies. So the mayors, and so it was a 2-year process of trying to figure out which trees really the ones that need to go, to prioritize which ones are the ones that really have some kind of risk to them now, how those are going to be compensated. For every tree that's chopped down, there's about 2 or 3 new trees that the city will plant. And one of the biggest discussions was what species to plant. The old administration wanted to do, like I showed you with the X, they wanted to just bring in 2 species of trees and do these long lines. And we really wanted to diversify that. We really wanted to bring these new and these better practices. So what we were just about to do right when the coronavirus hit was finally, after about 2 years, planting those trees. So we went from 2 species of trees that the city wanted to plant to 15 species of trees that they accepted our recommendations. And those 3 pollinator gardens that you see in the park now are also a result of that initial tree felling. So from 155 trees, they only ended up cutting down 45. It became a big conflict here in the city. But where it really became the most interesting is that this kind of research that's been done, specifically here in the Parque del Virrey, was really what mediated between a lot of public that was very angry about their losing some trees, the city about wanting to do this new design. And where we really came in was, well, what does the science say? What are the bats using, the butterflies, the bees, the birds? And it became kind of this middle ground where conservation became a really strong player in those discussions. So all in all, I think it was a positive, even though it was really conflictive, in the long run it's become a positive, it was a positive situation, because now the neighbors here, the resident associations, they were so active in not wanting to chop down trees, are now seeing this whole park, not only as a Parque del Virrey, but really in this wider context of the Gran Chico.
Great. Thanks. Good question, Cheryl.
Thank you.
I have one comment and one question, and I'll do the comment first. Number one, I commend you, because I mean, it's a fight, and you have to fight a very complex system to make sure that things go in the right direction. My one comment is that, you know, it'd be wonderful to think kind of tactically about how we can communicate with the rest of the AWC to help. So for instance, many of us have terraces. So, you know, if there's a quick list of the plants that we should be planting in our terrace, and you put that in the newsletter or on the WhatsApp, not only that, if you have a group that you would prefer us to buy from. I know that seems like you're selling something, but let me tell you, it's a hell of a lot easier if you say, call this guy or call this company and get these plants, you know. And I mean, I know a lot of us like to plant flowers in our terraces, and if we just had a quick list and knew that we were doing something that would really help, of course we would, you know, pick those plants. And of course, you know, remember us for volunteer opportunities. And I'm also kind of thinking, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity at some point to go into the schools you know, to teach the kids about this. They bring it home, they share the list with their parents, they plant some plants on the terrace, etc., to help this project. I have a bunch of questions, but one question I have is that as climate change becomes more intense, obviously a city's resiliency plan is really important. I know a lot of the cities in the United States do have a department that's focused on specifically climate resilience. Does Bogota have a city department that's specifically focused on climate resilience, or are you kind of having to work with a bunch of different players throughout the spectrum and try to get them to all go in the same direction?
Yeah, this is the latter. So Bogota historically has always been much more reactive to big floods, landslides, fires in the mountains. But this new administration has really taken a major step forward. So the agencies that are all involved in different ways, climate change and resiliency has been one of the biggest topics of this new administration, which is just a few months old. So the Bogota, the development plan for Bogota for the next 4 years just got approved yesterday, the day before, on Sunday. So this week they're going to kind of roll it all out, but a lot of the articles that are in there are specifically about climate change, about designing for resiliency, about urban drainage, sustainable urban drainage systems, about how the vegetation that's going into the city, as I said before, needs to start getting designed for these extremes. Really wet years or really dry years. In this diversity of trees, the diversity of vegetation that we use really helps us a lot in that direction, or against potential future plagues, pests in the trees. We have trees that's happened, and it's happened a lot in the United States. We have neighborhoods and parks, all of 1 or 2 species of tree. Some pest arrives, and then the cost of managing that, or the impact if you have to chop down a lot of trees, is just massive. So if we can diversify the urban forest and a lot of the habitats that are here, if something like that happens, which is a very high probability with climate change and as pests start to come up from the lowlands of Bogota, the impacts would be a lot more manageable. So things are definitely moving in the right direction. It's almost seemed like we've taken this major leap just from one administration to the next. Another thing that's really interesting about this administration is that not only they're planning for these 4 years, but it just so happens that also this year, at the end of this year, they want to present every 12 years or so, Bogota presents a longer term planning that's for every 12, 15 years. And it's up for renewal right now. So the new mayor is not only doing the 4-year plan, but is also going to be developing for the next 12 years. So all of these concepts, I think, are going to be really central to the future of Bogota in the very short, medium, and long term. But I think there's going to start to see a lot of action in the next year here in Bogota, which is really exciting.
That's wonderful, thanks. So I want to be mindful of people's time, and so folks might have other commitments at 2, and so if that's the case, I want to thank you for coming, and feel free to send any follow-up questions you might have, and we will definitely send out the recording for this. But do people want to ask a few more questions? I know Juan said that he's available, so we can keep going with that. But if people need to log off now, I understand.
I do have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So first of all, thank you. And I'd like to reiterate what Stephanie said. I have a garden and I would love it if I knew someone who could help me, or who to buy from, or who can teach. I have staff that are willing, but they don't know anything, and I have very little time. So if someone can teach my staff how to garden in an ecological way, I'd be really happy. So if you have that sort of contact or resources, please send it through. And the question is, if you more general for the Candelaria, it's a very particular neighborhood in that there's a lot of gorgeous private spaces that have tons of diversity, and There's a lot of closeness to the mountains, but in terms of public space, there's very, very little development. I'm just wondering if you know of any organizations that are working on the Candelaria in this sort of interconnected way that you've developed in the Virrey.
Not so much. I know that the city is really, because there's so little green space, public green space in the Candelaria, because the cities just weren't designed that way, you know, historically.
Yeah.
All the green spaces were inside the houses. Opening up more trails into the mountains with police presence, protection, security. So I know that's, from what I've heard of the Secretary of Environment here for the city, one of their priorities is opening up more access to the mountains, because there's not a whole lot of green space in La Candelaria.
Yeah.
But something like you mentioned, so there's still a lot of those old houses that are either hotels or restaurants and things like that, that have these beautiful historical gardens. And something that also we look towards, and so all the plants in that guide that we showed are more plants that are typically used more in type of an ornamental type garden. They can also be biodiverse. There's a whole other suite of plants that also is another big focus of this new administration, is urban agriculture.
Yeah.
So there's going to be, in the next few months, and definitely by the end of this year, a lot of organizations that are really promoting urban agriculture, which is great, because a lot of those herbs and fruits and plants, that everything from teas and different types of plants, most of those plants, when they flower, are excellent for pollinators as well. So as urban agriculture starts to develop in different spaces here in Bogota, and I know Candelaria, and they're going to be looking at spaces where they can open up those kinds of opportunities, like you see so much in the United States, these types of community gardens and things like that. There are also going to be these kind of small little hot spots of biodiversity, because you're going to have bees come in and butterflies and birds. So it's going to be really interesting to see as this urban agriculture develops. One of the things we've been offering to the city free of charge, one thing I forgot to say that I should, everything that we do is volunteer based. We do this all just because we're hobbyists. We love to go out and photograph birds and flowers. So all of our information is free for download off our website there, grupocomunitario.org. And we're always helping other barrios, other parks, other residents, other NGOs to fortify, say, their citizen science aspects of how they can start to photograph what they have there, and then prioritize what opportunities there are to enrich that area. So definitely one of my to-do lists for you guys is to come back and through Jessica, a couple of the top plants that work for terraces, and then further follow up for anybody who wants to do something more specific, say in the garden of their house or the garden of their building. Most of these plants and these pollinators were really designed for sunny sites. And so if your garden has at least half a day of good sun or your terrace, then you're a good candidate for enriching and more flowers. The plants will flower more insects and pollinators will use it if they're in sunny spots.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So I'll definitely help you guys develop, say, a top 5 or top 10 plants for terraces. And then for these gardens in the Candelaria or these other areas, that even if you start with the guide that's already there, it has a lot of recommendations on how to think about enriching your garden for wildlife. And it's very compatible, and they really go hand in hand with herb gardens and things, if you want fruiting trees and the like.
That's great. Other questions?
I have a question. First, thank you very much. It's great to see the work that you're doing, and you've inspired a lot of thought. We are also creating a experience shop, so we work with producers outside of
Bogota, but we are creating an experience shop to show what they do within Colombia and their products. And so we're also creating a building that we intend to be a very green building, an opportunity for agriculture and all of that. So maybe there's a collaboration point, because we are just in the design of this building right now. But my question is more specific to, you've worked mainly within sustainable cities. Do you work at all considering biodiversity out with farms in the country regions?
Yeah. So before I really got involved in urban biodiversity, in urban biodiversity issues, it was about 6 years ago. For all of the rest of my life, it's all been rural issues. So working with in management of cattle in riparian areas, looking at shade-grown coffee, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities in rural areas. Absolutely. If you go outside of, even outside of Bogota, but even in other places of Colombia, there's the more you start to think about these issues, the more you kind of see these opportunities everywhere. And so around the periphery of Bogota and the savannah, the neighboring regions, when we go, say, for a road trip, or we go out to visit some areas, and we're just driving and looking out the window and you're saying, wow, because you see these, like something you see a lot outside of Bogota are these fence lines or these tree lines. A lot of them are used these guys like wind blocks. And so you'll see them kind of bordering their plot. And they're of one tree. They're usually pine trees or cypress trees. And you look at, say, in England, in Europe, where you have these hedgerows, it's sort of a similar thing. But if we design those hedgerows, or we design those windbreaks with trees and shrub species that really also produce flowers and fruits, or that you can have pollinators there that also will help the production of the crops, then you really start to get this symbiosis going, where the farmers see these different aspects of wildlife as a positive, to have bigger and more complete and more mature crops of strawberries. There's a lot of strawberries in the area of Bogota, or in the outskirts, and other crops. So yeah, absolutely. There's potential really everywhere, which is one of the best things about it, to kind of keep you enthusiastic and positive, of seeing that there's so much opportunity to make things better, to grow our food better, to grow our food healthier, to live better, live healthier, and that our areas, our green spaces, are in that same line. These parks, like the Parque del Virrey, where you see a lot of people coming out for exercise, more and more now you see people walking around also with binoculars and cameras and taking photos of wildlife. There's just more opportunities of people to have some contact with green and with nature. And as these cities around the world develop, and the massive majority of the people start living in cities, more and more that importance of having people learn about ecological concepts in their neighborhood park, when they're thinking about what's going on in the Amazon, say. They're burning the Amazon there, and there's concerns about migratory birds, but they're learning a lot of these concepts here in the city. And that's the title, and part of the title of this talk was Thinking Globally but Acting Locally. So everywhere you look around the world, there's conflicts, there's issues, there's biodiversity loss. So what can we do that's really kind of within our grasp, within our day-to-day life, that we can make the world better, where we live, and have that kind of spread out with groups like the AWC and all those other groups and NGOs that I showed on the slide before, and universities and schools. Absolutely. I mean, the opportunities really are endless. It's just to really get to it.
Perfect. No, I fully agree with you. And if you have any resources that you can share, and I can send you a personal email, because I know mine's a little bit specific on what we're looking, but we are starting a project in Bichada, which is a slash and burn region for cattle raising. So we're looking at regenerative, and we sit along the Bita River, the first protected river in the world. And so we're looking to really focus in on the biodiversity aspect of that. So maybe some opportunities, or if you have any resources that you can share, would be much appreciated.
Absolutely, that sounds really exciting, and congratulations too for you and your group on making those kinds of experiences and opportunities happen. Yeah, absolutely. You can write us through Facebook, Twitter, or email. That's the best way, and then we can keep talking about however else we can help support those kinds of programs.
Wonderful. Any last questions? Let's maybe do one more if folks have it. Okay, I think that was a great one to end on. I totally agree. I think it's really great to, you know. Oh, Milena, did you have a question or no? Okay.
No, I just wanted to thank you guys for this very interesting and very well presented like discussion and presentation. So thank you guys so much. Like, I hope we can make this like a regular, you know, event. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for your support, Milena. And we'll definitely record it.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Juan.
Thank you. Thanks for participating. So yeah, we'll continue to think globally and act locally. I'll follow up with Juan to see what we can get in the newsletter. Great ideas, Stephanie, and exciting to think about some other opportunities that might be sparked through this talk. So we can always bug Juan later and have a follow-up conversation on something specific. So feel free to shoot me an email or shoot it to the whole group, the WhatsApp group. Okay, thank you so much for your time, Juan. We
Wonderful.
appreciate it.
You guys.
Muchas gracias. Ciao.
Yes, fun.
Everybody there at the AWC, thanks again. Really enjoyed it, and yeah, we'll definitely be in touch. And yeah, thanks again for having us. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Take care.
Ciao.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.